The Baghdad Billion? The night a dictator robbed his own bank? The largest cash heist in human history? Picture this. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Baghdad is asleep, or at least pretending to be. The streets are empty. The air is thick with tension. The city feels like a held breath. And in the pre-dawn darkness, 3 massive tractor-trailer trucks rumble slowly through the quiet streets of Iraq's capital, headlights cutting through the dark like a slow-moving ghost. They stop in front of a squat, cube-shaped building made almost entirely of reinforced concrete. No decorative facade. No fancy entrance. Just thick walls, almost no windows, and a front door that if you didn't know what lay behind it, you might mistake for a government utility office. But behind that door, billions. 2 men step out of one of the trucks. They walk calmly toward the entrance. One of them is carrying a piece of paper. Just a piece of paper. No guns, no explosives, no masks, no demands, shouted through a megaphone. Just a note. Within 5 hours. Those trucks will drive away carrying nearly $1 billion in cash. And the world won't find out for weeks. This is the story of the 2003 Baghdad Central Bank Heist, the largest cash robbery ever recorded in human history. Stay with me, because this story is absolutely insane from start to finish. The world on the edge of war. To truly understand what happened that night, we need to rewind the clock. Not just hours, but years. It's important to understand who Saddam Hussein really was, because this heist is inseparable from the man who ordered it. Saddam Hussein had ruled Iraq with an iron fist since 1979. He was not just a president or a prime minister. He was an all-seeing, all-consuming dictator who had woven himself into literally every fiber of Iraqi society. The military answered to him. The judiciary answered to him. The media answered to him. The economy answered to him. And yes, the banks answered to him. Some legal experts who later analyzed what happened argued that Saddam Hussein was an absolute dictator with personal, direct control over every aspect of the country's governance, including the central bank and other economic institutions. There are even those who suggested that the money in the vault might have technically been his, accumulated over 2 decades of total control over a nation sitting on some of the world's largest oil reserves. But none of that mattered on the night of March 17, 2003. What mattered was that the walls were closing in. At 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, which was 5 a.m. on March 18th in Baghdad, U.S. President George W. Bush appeared on national television. The speech was short. The message was not. He told Saddam Hussein and his sons that they had 48 hours to leave Iraq, where the United States military would begin its invasion. For most people watching that speech around the world, it was a moment of shock and political drama. But for Saddam Hussein, sitting inside one of his palaces in Baghdad, it was something else entirely. It was a countdown clock. He had spent years convinced that the Americans would blink, that diplomacy would somehow save him, that his weapons programs, real or imagined, would keep the superpowers at bay. But now, as he watched that speech, he knew this was real. He correctly predicted that once the air war began, it might be difficult for him to move about the country and get things done. So he had to act immediately. He needed money, a staggering amount of money, the kind of money that lets a man and his entire inner circle disappear, rebuild, and survive in exile indefinitely. The kind of money that buys silence, loyalty, passage across borders, and a new life. And he knew exactly where to get it. The players, who were these men? Before we walk through what happened minute by minute, let's meet the people at the center of this story. Saddam Hussein, the architect. You probably know the broad strokes of Saddam's story, the brutal dictatorship, the wars, the weapons programs, the palaces stuffed with gold fixtures and hundreds of luxury cars. But what made Saddam uniquely dangerous was his mind. He was cunning, patient, and utterly ruthless. He had survived multiple coup attempts, assassination plots, international sanctions, and a decade of post-Gulf War humiliation. He had built a surveillance state so thorough that rumors circulated within the Iraqi military that summary execution awaited anyone who dared contradict the dictator. One senior minister put it plainly: directly disagreeing with Saddam Hussein's ideas was unforgivable. It would be suicide. This was the man who sat down in his palace on the night of March 17, 2003, and decided to rob his own country's bank. Not in a panic, not impulsively, methodically. He picked up a pen, he wrote a note, he signed it, and he called for his son, Qasem Hussein, the executor. Qasem Saddam Hussein al-Nosiri al-Takriti was born on May 17, 1966, in Baghdad. He was Saddam's second son, appointed as his father's heir apparent in the year 2000. He served as deputy head of the Iraqi Special Security Organization and was also in charge of the Republican Guard, one of Iraq's most elite and feared military branches. Now here's where it gets interesting. Most people, when they think of Saddam's sons, think of Uday, the older brother who was flamboyantly violent, reckless, and genuinely psychotic. Uday kidnapped women off the streets of Baghdad for his personal pleasure. He murdered his father's personal valet at a party. He was loud, dangerous, and unpredictable, a liability even to his own father. Qasem was the opposite, although Qasem was considered just as ruthless as his older brother. He was more discreet and low profile. Was widely described as a family man and an attorney in training, who was said to have loathed the extravagance of his brother Uday. Where Uday was fire, Qasem was ice, and that made him far more dangerous. After proving himself in the brutal suppression of the Shiite uprising in 1991, Qasem quickly rose through the ruling Ba'ath Party structures, taking command of Iraq's intelligence, security forces, and the elite Republican Guard. The Iraqi Security Directorate that became Qasem's personal power base included the feared Mukhabarat, the secret police, which claimed a higher percentage of the national budget than any similar service in the world. As deputy head of the Special Security Organization, he was said to have authorized the use of torture against dissidents. In 1997, he was identified as instrumental in ordering prisons cleaned out, a chilling euphemism for mass executions. All these operations reportedly resulted in the deaths of over 1,200 prisoners in Baghdad alone during late 1996. In early 1997, with Qasem directing personnel to prioritize political prisoners and military deserters, this was the man Saddam trusted with his most sensitive mission. Not a general, not a minister, his son. There was one more wrinkle to Qasem's power that reveals just how total it was. Iraq's defense minister openly admitted that working for Qasem Hussein was a mistake. Qasem knew nothing. He understood only simple military things like a civilian. And yet, any commander who spoke truth to Qasem would lose his head. Power without competence, enforced by fear. Qasem Hussein. Abd al-Hamid Mahmoud, the Shadow, the third key figure in this operation, is one most people have never heard of. That's exactly how he liked it. Abd al-Hamid Mahmoud was Saddam Hussein's personal secretary, his closest administrative aide, and the man who controlled access to the dictator himself. Think of him as the ultimate gatekeeper. Nothing reached Saddam without going through Mahmoud. No documents, no visitors, no messages. He was Saddam's right hand in the most literal sense. If Qasem was the muscle, Mahmoud was the operational brain, the logistics man, the detail-oriented fixer who made sure the machine ran smoothly. Local witnesses saw Qasem Hussein and Saddam's personal assistant, Abd al-Hamid Mahmoud, get out of one of the trucks and disappear into the bank. His presence that night was deeply significant. Saddam didn't send Qasem alone. He sent his most trusted son and his most trusted aide together. This tells you everything about how seriously Saddam treated this operation. The target, the Central Bank of Iraq. Now let's talk about the building itself, because understanding the bank explains why this heist was so brazen and why it could only have been pulled off the way it was. The Central Bank of Iraq was essentially a fortress, a cube-shaped building made of reinforced concrete with almost no windows. Built in 1985, the building where they kept the cash was specifically designed to be impenetrable. This wasn't a glass and marble financial showcase like you'd see in New York or London. This was a bunker, a vault with an address. Its walls were thick enough to withstand substantial force. Its windows were minimal by design. Fewer openings meant fewer vulnerabilities. Its security systems were state-of-the-art for Iraq in the 1980s. And yet, as the night of March 17th turned into the early hours of March 18th, all of that security meant absolutely nothing. The only way a robber could get in was through the front door, and that's exactly what they did. The heist minute by minute. It's now the early hours of March 18, 2003. Bush's speech has ended. The 48-tower clock has started ticking. And somewhere in Baghdad, tractor trailers are being loaded with men and equipment and driven through the sleeping city toward the Central Bank of Iraq. A little over 1 hour after Bush finished his ultimatum speech, local witnesses saw 3 or 4 large trucks pull up to the front of the main branch of the Central Bank of Iraq. Let's pause here. Think about this image. These are not inconspicuous vehicles. They are not vans or SUVs or unmarked cars. They're tractor trailers, the same kind of massive commercial. Trucks you see hauling goods down a motorway. Enormous, unmistakable, completely in the open. They pulled up to the front of the Central Bank of Iraq in full view of anyone who happened to be watching, without a single effort at concealment, because they didn't need to hide. They owned the city. Witnesses saw Saddam Hussein and Saddam's personal assistant, Abd al-Hamid Mahoud, get out of one of those trucks and disappear into the bank. Once inside, Qusay did something that would be almost comical if the stakes weren't so immense. He walked up to the bank's governor and handed him a piece of paper. The note was marked with the words "Top Secret" in Arabic, and was a handwritten letter signed by Saddam Hussein himself. The note's message was chilling in its simplicity. It stated that they needed to relocate the money as a matter of national security. It explained that these actions were necessary, in Saddam's own words, to protect this money from American aggression. The bank governor read the note. He could have refused, could have asked for time to verify. He could have picked up the phone and called someone, a lawyer, a minister, anyone. But he didn't, because you don't say no to the son of Saddam Hussein standing in your bank at 4 o'clock in the morning. Not in Saddam's Iraq. Not when you know what happens to people who refuse. No financial rationale was offered to bank officials for the removal of the money, and none was needed. So the bank governor gave the order, and the loading began. Bank officials state that Qusay and another unidentified man oversaw the cash. Boxes of $100 bills secured with stamped seals, known as security money, being loaded into the trucks and trailers during a 5-hour operation. 5 hours in the dark, in near silence. Bag after bag, box after box. Container after container of crisp American $100 bills wrapped in tight bundles, stacked in metal cases, carried out through the front door of Iraq's central bank and loaded onto those waiting trucks. The amount of money, some $900 million in US, $100 bills, and $100 million in euros, was so large it had to be taken from the bank in 3 tractor trailers. Think about the sheer physical weight and volume of that. Single $100 bill weighs approximately 1 gram. $1 million in $100 bills weighs about 10 kilograms. $1 billion in $100 bills weighs roughly 10,000 kilograms, 10 metric tons. It takes up the volume of a mid-sized moving truck, just in paper alone. They needed 3 tractor trailers. By the time the loading was complete, the cash amounted to a full quarter of the central bank's entire hard currency reserves. In a single night, gone, loaded onto trucks and driven away as dawn broke over Baghdad. The crew drove away at 4 a.m. on March 18th, just hours before the United States began bombing Iraq. The trucks disappeared into the city. The bombs fall, and the heist is forgotten. Less than 24 hours later, the world changed forever. On March 19, 2003, coalition forces launched the first airstrikes on Baghdad, the opening salvo of one of the most consequential military conflicts of the 21st century. Explosions lit up the skyline. Anti-aircraft fire traced bright lines into the darkness. The city that Qusay's trucks had driven through in silence the night before was now a war zone. On March 20th, coalition ground troops set off from Kuwait to begin the invasion of Iraq. By April 9th, less than 1 month after those first airstrikes, coalition ground forces officially occupied and secured Baghdad. Saddam's statue fell in Firdos Square, broadcast live around the world, in what became one of the defining images of the decade. In the chaos, the looting, the shock, and the geopolitical earthquake of those weeks, almost nobody was asking about the central bank. Almost. The Discovery soldiers find the money April 20th, 2003. The war is just over a month old. Baghdad has fallen. American soldiers are sweeping Saddam's palace's vast opulent compounds stuffed with the fruits of decades of kleptocracy. Troops from the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division were raiding one of Saddam's palaces outside of Baghdad. During a routine sweep of one of the rooms, one soldier noticed something wrong with a wall. It was false. On the other side of that false wall, he found dozens of metal containers. 6 containers were opened at random. Each one was stuffed with $4 million worth of neatly stacked $100 bills. The soldiers couldn't comprehend what they were looking at. This wasn't a military asset. This wasn't weapons or intelligence documents. This was just money. Incomprehensible amounts of it, hidden behind a fake wall in a dictator's palace. Word spread quickly. More containers were found. Then more. The currency was eventually transported to Baghdad's international airport, still under heavy guard, where an army finance team set about the extraordinary task of counting it all. The Army's senior finance officer, Major Rod King, oversaw the accounting and securing of the funds. He remarked, "Most people don't think of finance on the battlefield. But there is a role in this conflict, and it appears we will continue to receive captured currency. We have not secured funds like this since World War II. The final count? $661 million in cash, recovered from Saddam's palaces. It was an astonishing amount. But it also raised an urgent question: where was the rest? Quasay had taken roughly $1.04 billion. 3rd Infantry found $661 million. That leaves approximately $379 million completely unaccounted for. And there were more troubling questions. A U.S. Army Special Forces officer, Colonel Ted Seal, said intelligence indicated that a convoy of tractor-trailers was seen crossing the border into Syria. But the contents of the trucks were unknown. Syria had some of the money, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars, been spirited out of Iraq entirely across the Syrian border before the coalition forces had even taken Baghdad. Nobody knew, and nobody has found out since the Hunt Quasay's last days. With Baghdad fallen and Saddam in hiding, America's most wanted list in Iraq had 3 names at the very top: Saddam himself and his 2 sons, Uday and Quasay. The brothers had gone underground almost immediately after the fall of Baghdad. They moved frequently, avoiding patterns, using trusted intermediaries, relying on a network of loyalists who were either genuinely devoted to the old regime or too afraid to betray it. Saddam Hussein's closest aide and personal secretary, Abid Hamid Mahmoud, who had been with Quasay the night of the bank heist, was captured and told his interrogators that he and Saddam's 2 sons had sought refuge in Syria but were turned back. According to the smuggler who took them across the border, they came again after less than 48 hours. So the Syria escape route failed. The brothers were pushed back into Iraq. They kept moving. During their time in hiding at a villa in Mosul, the sheikh reportedly left Uday and Quasay playing video games for weeks. These 2 of the most feared men in Iraq, one of whom had just carried off the greatest cash heist in history, were hiding in a private residence, playing video games, waiting for instructions from a father who was himself on the run. On July 16, 2003, Quasay was asked whether he intended to flee Iraq. He replied, "This is no longer possible. I will stay in Iraq awaiting the instructions of the father." 6 days later, it was over. The owner of the home where they were hiding was eventually granted U.S. citizenship and received a $30 million reward for giving up their whereabouts. On July 22, 2003, American forces from the 101st Airborne Division and Special Forces operators surrounded the villa in the northern city of Mosul, acting on a tip. A Special Forces team attempted to apprehend everyone in the house. After being fired upon, the Special Forces moved back and called for backup. After Task Force 121 members were wounded, the 327th Infantry surrounded and fired on the house with tow missiles, Mk-19 grenade launchers, M2 machine guns, and small arms. After about 4 hours of battle, the whole operation lasting 6 hours, the soldiers entered the house and found 4 dead. The 4 killed were Quasay, his brother Uday, a bodyguard, and Quasay's son, 14-year-old Mustafa, a 14-year-old boy, dead in a safe house in Mosul, alongside his father and his uncle, caught in the wreckage of a collapsing dynasty. When American forces finally searched the premises, there was no sign of the remaining $350 million from the Iraqi Central Bank. No one has seen or heard of the money since. The fall of Saddam and the missing millions, Saddam Hussein survived another 5 months as a fugitive. He was found on December 13, 2003, hiding at a farmhouse near his birth city of Tikrit, in a hole in the ground, disheveled and disoriented. He was immediately transported to an American base in Baghdad, put on trial for war crimes in June 2004, convicted on November 5th, and hanged on December 30th, 2006. The man who orchestrated the greatest bank robbery in history was executed without ever spending a single dollar of the stolen money. The note he signed that night, those few handwritten lines that moved nearly $1 billion, outlasted his regime, his sons, and eventually himself. And then came the Pentagon's admission that made the whole story even more surreal. In January 2012, 9 years after the heist, the Pentagon admitted that it had lost track of $100 million of the $661 million that U.S. forces had recovered, according to the Department of Defense's Special Inspector General's office. The $100 million disappeared due to a records management error. $100 million. To recap the full accounting, Saddam's note ordered $920 million in USD and 90 million euros in euros. Approximately $120 million total taken, approximately $1.04 billion. Recovered by U.S. forces, $661 million. Lost by the Pentagon due to records error, $100 million of that recovered, some never found. Ever to this day, $379 million, that last number, $379 million, simply vanished into the chaos of war and has never resurfaced. The legal debate, was it even a crime? Here's a fascinating footnote that most people overlook entirely. It was what happened at the Central Bank of Iraq on March 18, 2003. Technically a robbery. It sounds like an absurd question. Of course it was a robbery. $1 billion was taken by force, or at least by extreme coercion, from a national treasury. But some legal scholars argue otherwise. Some legal experts noted that Saddam Hussein had personal direct control over every aspect of the country's governance, including the central bank and other economic institutions. The $1 billion might even have been Saddam Hussein's own personal funds, collected over the course of more than 2 decades of ruling Iraq. When an absolute dictator orders his country's bank to give him money, and the bank complies, is that theft? Or is it a tyrant accessing funds he considers his own? It's a chilling philosophical rabbit hole, because it reveals something profound about how authoritarian regimes work. The law doesn't constrain the dictator. The dictator is the law. There is no theft when you own everything. That reality is part of what made this heist possible, and it's part of why it remains so haunting. The aftermath Iraq rebuilds the Central Bank of Iraq was found by U.S. Treasury and Coalition Provisional Authority inspectors in a state of near ruin after the Battle of Baghdad. The bank was left in ruins after the invasion and the mass looting that followed. Rebuilding Iraq's financial system from scratch was a monumental task. The entire banking infrastructure had to be redesigned, recapitalized, and reoriented around democratic governance and market principles. The Central Bank of Iraq was re-established as Iraq's independent central bank by the Central Bank of Iraq, Law of 2004, with authorized capital of $100 billion. Slowly, painfully, over the following decade, Iraq's financial system began to recover. Foreign exchange reserves eventually increased to nearly $67 billion as of September 2012, due to a rise in oil revenues, indicating the improved ability to deal with repayment of foreign debt, currency stabilization, and the coverage of average monthly imports. And in a remarkable symbol of renewal in August 2010, world-renowned architect Zaha Hadid, born in Baghdad herself, was appointed to design a new headquarters for the Central Bank of Iraq. On February 2, 2012, Hadid joined the central bank governor at a ceremony in London to formally sign the agreement for the design of the new CBI headquarters building. A woman born in Baghdad, rebuilding the institution that had been gutted by the man who once ruled that city. There's poetry in that. The unanswered questions, so let's be honest about what we don't know. Because there is a lot we don't know. We don't know exactly how many people were in those trucks that night. It has never been determined what other individuals were involved in the bank robbery, and it is assumed that some of them may still be in possession of the remaining missing cash. We don't know what happened to the $379 million that was never recovered. Did it make it across the Syrian border? Was it buried somewhere in the Iraqi desert? Was it distributed among Saddam's loyalists to fund the insurgency? Is there a former regime official somewhere living very quietly on hundreds of millions of dollars in cash? We don't know why Saddam, having pulled off the greatest cash heist in history, didn't actually use the money to flee. He was found hiding in a hole in the ground near Tikrit, not living in a Swiss villa. Why? Was he genuinely committed to staying? Had he lost access to the funds? Did he believe he could ride out the storm? We will never know, because the men who planned it are dead. Saddam, Qusay, Uday. The secrets went with them. The 2003 Baghdad Central Bank Heist remains the largest confirmed cash robbery in recorded human history. No vault was cracked, no alarms were triggered, no shots were fired, no disguises were worn. The most powerful man in one of the world's most oil-rich nations simply picked up a pen, wrote a note, signed his name, and sent his son to collect. And within 5 hours, while the city slept and the world held its breath on the eve of war, nearly $1 billion in cold, hard American cash was loaded onto trucks and driven off into the Baghdad night. 3 men at the center of it died violent deaths within 4 years. The money, most of it, was recovered in a dictator's palace. Some of it was lost by the world's most powerful military through a records error, and hundreds of millions of dollars remains missing to this day. Somewhere out there, that money still exists. It's in a vault, in a wall, in a buried container, in an offshore account, nobody knows. But it's out there. And if you're watching this video thinking there's no way this is real, I completely understand. But it is. Every single detail. The greatest bank heist in history wasn't pulled off by a criminal mastermind in a ski mask. It was pulled off by a government, by a family, by a father who knew his time was up and decided that if he was going down, he was taking the money with him. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think anyone ever found that missing $379 million? And if so, where do you think it went? Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. We'll see you in the next one.